Hello all, Alison here. Welcome back to Words and Pictures for a few minutes of fun. I'm having a few minutes of fun today colouring in some roses. We're going to explore with different kinds of mediums. As you can see, I've got watercolours on the desk. I've got the Distress watercolour pencils. I've got some Distress ink pads. And yeah, really, you can colour with anything that makes you happy. Pencils, pens, paints, acrylic paints. And of course, you don't need my stamps. You can apply these techniques to any floral stamps you've got, but just a few little thoughts, tips and tricks as I'm colouring in for you to take away and play with yourselves. So you may have noticed in previous videos I mentioned, I think, that I've put together a rosy palette. And yeah, I've been doing some freehand roses over time, and this is the perfect palette now to use this. I think there's some green gold on here, maybe sap green. Not quite sure what's going on there. Some sort of grey. That looks like it might be a Payne's grey. Then there are various pinks. I can't remember anymore what these are. I put them on here 2 years ago. But I do know that I've got some Quinacridone Rose, Naples Yellow and French Ochre in there. This is some sort of sienna. So it's a mixed palette thinking of roses. Then I've got these samples that I made for the recent release. As in June 2026. If you're watching this 7 years later, then not that recent. These were all coloured with Distress inks, so using the Distress ink pads. So perfectly possible to get yourself roses. And that's just to show you that one of the things that I've tried to design with this set is a flexibility of positioning so that you can lay things out in different positions, different angles, so that it doesn't always look like the same stamp. You've got something different going on in each of those 4 panels. But for now, I've just stamped lots onto a piece of the fairly cheapish watercolour paper. This is the Studio Line pad that I very often use just when I'm playing or exploring. And yeah, it's great for just trying out different colour palettes, trying out different colourways. Roses obviously come in a wealth of different colours. So it's really up to you to pick colours that make you excited. I haven't got my expensive watercolour brushes on the go here. I've just got some... I haven't got my expensive watercolour brushes. Did I say that right? I've just got some water brushes. So that's the Pentel Trio. This rose here, I mentioned in the launch blog post. I'll link to the launch blog post and the live launch video if you want to check out more details about the inspiration behind these stamps and where these poetry fragments come from. This one is done with, believe it or not, Crackling Campfire and aged Mahogany. But in spite of those being really, really full-on colours, it's possible to get a lovely, gentle watercolour effect with them. So we might have a little go at that at some point over the next 20 minutes, maybe half an hour. When I say a few minutes of fun, I mean exactly that. A few could be many. Good, let's see. Number of ways to go about this. You can put some water onto your rose to start with, and then let your mediums mix in with it. You can go in, that would be doing wet in wet. So I create some wetness and I put more wetness over the top. I can go wet on dry. So I start with dry paper and put some wet medium on. I can even, with my pencils, go dry on dry and make them wet afterwards. I can go dry on wet, apply these dry pencils, all sorts of ways to go about it. I'm going to zoom in so that you will be able to get a look at what's going on here. I've stamped these in archival inks, so they should stay put. There's a slight texture on the paper, but not too much, but it should give us a reasonable amount of flow as we move our colours around. I think they're stamped in maybe leaf green, maybe olive, maybe some potting soil, or that could be ground espresso in the Distress archival formulation. Let's take a look. I have zoomed in quite a lot. I'll try to remember that and not go off camera. I'm going to give the paints in this little tray a spritz of water. That will reactivate even these tiny little thin layers of mopped up paint will be ready to play again. I'm also going to, let's start with a little bit of water on the rose. On good watercolour paper, this is medium watercolour paper, I would say, in terms of quality. On good watercolour paper, you should find that your paint, your pigment, will only travel to the places where you have put water. So if you want to start with a little watery wash inside these petals and then add, so let's take maybe a little bit of this Quinacridone Rose and whatever is here on the mat. I think there could be some Anthraquinoid Red, because that is one of my favourite reds. And then what I'm going to do is I'm not going to colour the whole petal. I'm going to start in that inner area. So the inside part of that petal, or the underneath part of that petal. And I'm going to let the water carry that pigment. If I see that I want it to just move a little more, I'm just going to help it along. So this is getting me immediately a shading on these petals that goes from somewhere deeper to somewhere lighter as they head outwards. This one had water in both places, and so that has already travelled, but I'm just going to help the illusion of that deeper colour towards the centre of the rose. So a more full-on application of colour. So that's a really deep pink. Again, will travel if you apply it into the water, or in this place where I applied it onto the dry paper, but then with a watery brush, I can encourage it to move around. Some of these petals I'm going to leave quite pale, because really that's what happens both when light hits a petal, but also as a rose unfurls, it tends to get paler towards the edges. Going to add in a little bit into these rose buds where the colour is often quite intense. So that just enables me, that's a slightly different shade of pink, so I'm just allowing that to mix on the paper. Let's go in with another intense little rosebud. So very often, as I say, the colour is very intense in those tiny buds, packed in tight, waiting to unfurl. And if you feel like you've got too much, again, on good watercolour paper, you should be able to lift up with a clean brush. So I'm just cleaning off my brush on the paper here so that I can then pick up some of that colour that wasn't entirely making me happy. Spread that out. So that's some watercolour paint going onto that rose. I'm going to let the flower colour dry a little bit before I come back in to do leaves, because in this one I want to be quite precise. It's nice sometimes, especially with a freehand rose, to have colours melting and bleeding into each other, but for a colouring in session, which is what I'm sort of regarding this as opposed to a painting session, this is a colouring in session, I'm going to stay quite neat and tidy. What is slightly calling my name, I've got so much water on here that this paint is running around, is maybe to add just a little touch of something a bit yellowy in here. So I've got the French ochre, just going to pick up a bit of that colour, let it mix with the pinks that are already here, because I think that's going to just give me something a bit more alive. When you apply a single colour of paint, it always has a slight sort of mechanical look to it, and as soon as you let another colour come in and play, you get something a bit more lively, a bit more interesting. And it's partly because if you look closely at roses, they're never one colour. Light and shade and all those things play a part in the variation of colour that you see on a rose petal, even thinking maybe a little bit of that Naples Yellow. So it's now becoming a little bit reminiscent of a peace rose, but that's very pretty. So on one of these others, let's see, maybe we'll start with some distressed watercolour pencil. And I am going to start with it in pencil form, so maybe dried marigold would be nice. Let's pop the brushes down for a moment. Seem to have mislaid the lid. Oh, there it is. So with this one, I'm going to come in, similar sort of thing. I'm going to apply colour more forcefully, more firmly, pressing more firmly around the interior of that rose head and around the shaded parts of these petals, so that I'm building that deeper layer of colour. That was dried marigold, was it? So this is Tattered Rose. So again, I'm going to layer up a few different colours, and when I come to activate them, they'll start to liven up and mix. I'm wondering whether to go with something as bold as maybe Festive Berries. Just get ourselves a little sense of a red rose. I'm not wild about red roses. Most of the roses in my garden are pale pinks and yellows and whites, and sort of combinations of those shades. So as you can see, that colour is going on fairly loosely. I'm not being terribly bothered about being very tidy. Gonna get, actually that's the thickest of those nibs. I'm not sure that's what I want. This is the medium. And I'm just going to apply that to the Distress watercolour pencil that is on here, and you can see immediately it activates and it moves it around. And I'm going to let those colours just mix and blend as they go. Again, if I want to make sure I'm not adding too much colour, keep a piece of kitchen towel available, and you can just knock back the colour both on your brush and on the paper by using that. So on some of these petals I put no colour at all, but because I've got some paint on the brush now and there's paint around them on the flower itself, that's just enabling me to move colour into those areas where I didn't actually put any specific colour. Again, I'm going to go for the heart of this rose with a bit more depth. So that was adding dry pencil to dry paper and then adding a bit of water to it. But now this paper is moist, I can also go in with my dry pencil and just intensify in places that sense of shading. Doesn't have to be all pinks and reds. You could absolutely go in with something greyish, or purples can often be a really good colour to shade with. Just take a look at either photos or actual roses in the sun, and you'll see that where the shadows fall, it can be all kinds of shades of blues and purples, or it can simply look like a darker tone of the colours you've already got on the go. So that's making me also happy as a rose. Yep, and again I'm going to let that dry a little bit in order to go back in with my greens in a minute. Going to add a bit of intense colour to these rose buds. What else did we use? Dried marigold. It would be fair to have a bit of dried marigold in there as well, wouldn't it? So I'm now pressing harder with my Distress watercolour pencil, and that's bringing more pigment off the stick, as it were. So that's going to get me a more intense version of the colour mixes we've got up there, just by changing the pressure that I use with the pencil. I'm getting more pigment to play with. That means I get a more intense version of the colour tone. And with these rose buds, it's really kind of up to you. You can decide, is this greenery, is this pinkness, I've left it a little bit flexible within the shading of this rose for you to decide how you want to really bring it to life. I'm going to lift up a little bit of this because it's quite in your face. I'm certainly going to lift up that bit because I do want that to be green. So I'm going to come back in with just water over that area, pick that up. So that takes me back to somewhere where I can just add green to it without too much trouble. If I want to use the Distress ink pads, if you haven't got the pencils, no problem. Get myself some ink. So that's Crackling Campfire, that's aged Mahogany. Both very intense colours, very full on. But what I'm going to do is give them a good spritz of water. So I'm using now my silicone craft mat, any craft mat will do, as a mixing palette. And that's the Crackling Campfire, and you can see it's a lovely soft orange. I'm going to go again onto dry paper here because that gives me a bit more control. Watery paper will give you a lovely looseness. Dry paper is going to give you a bit more control over what and where you're applying colour. So you can see if I pick up these very watery droplets, I get a lovely delicate version of the colour tone. It doesn't have to be this full-on red or fiery red. You can create by using water, by varying the amount of water you add. Real delicate ombre effects, capturing exactly as much colour as you want. So as I'm going, there's more and more water arriving, and I'm not mopping it up. So I'm letting this stay a lot looser. Let me hold you up what's going on so you can see that I'm allowing those colours a little bit more freedom to leave white space, to mix a little bit or not mix, a looser look for that. I'm starting to feel like I'd quite like a bit of Crackling Campfire here, just to fire up these petals. And that's the beauty of watercolour mediums if you're working with the translucents. So distress inks are translucent, distress oxides are opaque. If you're working with a translucent medium, a watercolour or watercolour pencil, you can layer up, officially in watercolour terms it's called glazing, putting one colour over the top of another colour to change the effect that you've got. So I'm going to go in and glaze now officially. Oh, I'm not quite glazing because I'm still going wet in wet. Glazing is when you take wet paint over dry paint, which I did there. This paint here is still slightly wet, so officially that's wet on wet. But the names don't matter. What's important is playing and discovering how pigment and water move together to create beautiful, soft, blended effects. And yes, in watercolour, leaving white space is always effective for capturing light. When you're thinking about watercolour, really light is created with white space. If you're using other mediums, you can always add white over the top, but there's really no such thing as a transparent white that really works over the top of things. So your desire when you're watercolouring is probably to leave white space that can then work as your highlights, as your white space, as your light catching. I'm not very fond of this bright pink right in the middle here, so I'm going to see, even though it's dried a little bit, whether I can pick that up. There we go, that's better. And then what I might do is drop a bit of the aged mahogany right into the deep part of there. Can you see how that gives depth right to that centre part? So I might do the same thing here, just creating that sense of the depth of the centre of the rose. One of the books I grew up on was called The Heart of the Rose. It was a beautiful vintage hardback book. Text and then black and white sketches here and there, but every once in a while you'd turn a page and there would be a beautiful full colour watercolour illustration, just beautiful. And I used to go to it again and again and again. It was about a little girl who shrank down and was able to visit the fairies in charge of each rose, and they showed her how they spray painted the roses each morning to make them look lovely. Which takes you into sort of Alice in Wonderland and the Red Queen demanding that the painters paint the roses. They've planted white roses and she wants them red and she wants them painted. But I think that's a different kind of control. So yeah, while I've got this ink, watery ink that I've made into watercolour paint on the mat, I'm just adding a bit of colour to some of these little rosebuds that are round and about. So you can, if you stamp in a pale colour, you can create something with a good deal of softness. If you stamp in a vintage brown, you're getting sort of vintage illustration. Stamping in green I quite like because once you get the greens on, it tends to melt a little bit into the background. But this is all just ways of playing. The joy of having the stamps is that you don't have to go through the drawing of things every time. You can just practice your watercolouring, practice adding colour to a stamped image that you just stamp repeatedly and then play with. What should we go with first? Let's go with this watercolour one here. And I might switch. No, I'll stay with the larger brush head initially for the large leaves. So I'm just picking up again some colour from this palette. Going to take it on the lower side of each leaf. That's quite a zingy green, isn't it? I'm trying to keep these brush strokes loose and sort of leaf shaped, because that really helps with just inducing that sense of the flow of what the flower is up to. I'm going to drop just a little shading of grey into those lower areas as well. And that could actually be quite nice. Maybe, ooh, don't want too much of it though. Maybe just under this petal here to really give me the sense of that petal leaning over. Maybe a little touch under here to really give me that sense of that petal is being shaded under there. Maybe a little touch of this, there's a sort of a grey pink that's built up there. So again, I'm just going to use that to build a little bit of depth in the shading of this rose. And the same thing can happen here. This one's still slightly wet. So again, just noticing whether your surface is wet or dry is going to make a difference to how the paint moves when you apply it. If it's completely dry, you'll get much less movement. If it's slightly wetter, that second layer that you're adding will blend and mix as it goes. I'm going to add a little bit more detailing again around some of these shaded areas. But on this one, again, just trying to keep things a bit looser, not thinking too hard, not working too hard on this bottom one. Keep things soft. Right, so with this, I'm then going to use what is now a fairly clean brush, hopefully, yeah, to just spread out that colour into the top half of the leaf. And immediately you can see that gives me a sense of the shading, where the light might be hitting the leaves, where they're just, as you look at them, the colour is a lot less intense as you perceive it because of the light hitting it. I'm going to come in and now I'm barely touching the nib of the brush to the paper because I want to keep, these Pentel brushes are pretty good at keeping a fine tip, but as soon as I press down, then I get a really thick mark. If I stay really on the tip of it, and I could switch to the even finer brush tip, I'm still working with the medium here. If you press very lightly, barely touching it to the paper, then you keep that lovely pointy nib. That, I mean, that's true of all brushwork. How much pressure you apply will change the kind of brush stroke you get. So again, just I've got some colour on the brush. I'm adding a little bit extra to some of these leaves in places just to get a bit more shaping, a bit more detail. And I also sort of want a bit more, I want a bit more of a bluey green in there in places. So let's mix our mediums. What do I want? Maybe a bit of Lucky Clover or even pine needles. Rustic Wilderness might do it because it's a very acid green at the moment, and that's giving me the impression of a slightly unhealthy rose leaf. A nice healthy rose leaf maybe wants a little bit more soft blue green to it. So yeah, a little bit of Rustic Wilderness there is just giving us slightly healthier rose leaves. There we are. Nice. You could actually add a blue. Doesn't have to be another green that you add. Blue will give you a lovely sense of shading. Yes, that's nice. And I might do the same around here because I've got the fine nib of the pencil. I can just add a little bit of really precise colour to some of those buds up there, which I could either loosen or not loosen with water. It's pretty much entirely up to you. Sometimes that really intense hit of colour, not moved around with water, can be a lovely thing to play with. Grand. What were we doing here? I can't remember now. That was pencils, wasn't it? So this one, again, I could, as we did with the flower colour to start with, add it direct to the paper, but the other way to get some paint out of your distress watercolour pencils, so I'm dipping it in the water jar, there you go, proof, and then just work that onto the mat. This is peeled paint. What I generally do when I do this is I'll have a little piece of paper towel lying to one side so that that's a very messy nib now. I don't want it to leak all over my mat because these are solid pigment. That's just paper wrapped around the outside. The rest is solid pigment that just goes on beautifully. What do we got here? Shabby shutters. Oh, that might be quite nice. So I'm giving myself a little palette of greens. That's the peeled paint, the Rustic Wilderness, and the Shabby shutters. And rather than applying the pencil to the paper, I'm now going to use them as paint to just apply directly to this. And again, I'm putting down wet paint and then putting down some more wet paint. So essentially it starts wet on dry, because I apply that paint to the dry paper, but then I'm almost immediately going into a wet in wet effect, because I'm then putting wet paint over wet paint. So again, you don't need to stress about the official terminology of what you're doing. Just know that it will be a different effect if you add wet paint over other wet paint. And you can also, of course, mix these paints on the mat to get yourself the colours that make you happy. So that's pretty happy making. Yep. Again, keeping that nice and loose. This one down here has an altogether sort of grungier look to it. So I'm going to bring in a little bit of this grey, and that's going to allow me to mix up a sort of grey-green that'll really give us deep shadows down here. Oh, that's a lot. That's a lot of grey, but let's work with it and see what we get. So I can just spread out the grey that I've got. And if I've still got too much, then I'll come in with just a little bit of paper towel, pick it up, soften it. And then, having created that shadow, it's almost dry, I'm going to come in over with some green. So fresh green on the top half, fresh green on the top half, and then just allowing that green to mix in. So I've got an altogether grungier rose going on down here, which is making me quite excited. I like it. If I need more paint, I'll just come. These are still wet here. I don't need to dip again at the moment into the water. There's quite a lot of pigment still available to come off and play. And again, just very light touch with the brush head so that I can keep that fine point. I still haven't switched to the fine brush. I'm still just working with this. So since we've got these greys, let's create a little bit more shading under the rose here on this rose hip. There's sort of loose bit in the middle there that, again, you can decide whether that's leaf or rose petal or even just sky in there behind those. That's quite fun, that dark one. Contrast is always going to be your ally when you're making something look dramatic. So deeper darks and lighter lights will create more drama in whatever you're painting or colouring. So let's create a little bit more shade down there. Oh, this was supposed to be green, wasn't it? There we go. Now you're green. Very good. Okay, so I'm trying to keep the palette on camera as well as the painting that's happening. But you can see that you can really pick up and mix any of these mediums. If I wanted green from an ink pad, I can just smoosh some green from an ink pad down onto the mat. Or I can choose to bring these actual watercolours into the mix those in, and then I've got the ability to come in and create almost any colour green I like. I want something a bit bluer again, so let's see, what's this? Lucky Clover. Not a colour I use very much. Ooh, yeah, that's very turquoise. But if I mix it with some of the greens that are already here, I think what it'll give me is quite a nice mid-green, garden green, freshly rained green coming down on that bud there. And we did have a lot of rain last night. It hasn't quite broken the weather. There's due to be another thunderstorm later today. And then we'll get a proper shift from the slight steaminess. So you can see these varieties of greens. You don't have to work with a pre-mixed green to create green, of course. Go with yellows and blues and you can create even more varieties and shades and possibilities as you paint. So I'm just picking up whatever's here now, really. Use up what's on the mat, not really thinking very hard about where it is. I can see I've got darks here, got the bluesy one here, I've got a slightly lighter bit over here. So I'm just keeping a little eye out on what's where on that mat in terms of the kinds of greens I've got. I've painted this rosebud in completely green, fine with that on this particular version. Sometimes I've made it be flowery, sometimes I haven't. Quite want maybe a little bit more. I'm just wondering about some Lumberjack Plaid. That's another really full-on red, but I think probably, place that down on the paper towel as well. I think probably if I go for a fairly watery mix of it, I'll be able to get something, yes, a nice soft cherry red that's really rather pretty. That's nice. I like that. So again, I can choose to add that in ever more watery washes to some of the other stuff that's going on. Might be nice to just liven up this grungy rose with it. So this is glazing now, adding colour over dry colour. All very pretty. And it is. I mean, this latest release has really gone full-on floral. In fact, that's the name of the workshop. If you happen to be in Scotland at the end of July, this is 2026 again, come and join me at Stampers Grove in Lily's Leaf. That's not too far from Edinburgh. I'll link details about that workshop down below. And yeah, there are a few places left on that workshop if you happen to be geographically available somewhere in Scotland on the Saturday the 25th of July. It is 2026. Come and have a play in a workshop called Full On Floral, where we'll do a bit of this, we'll do a bit of other stuff, we'll do all kinds of grassy tips and techniques, layering tips and techniques, project tips and techniques for using these flowers, plus some of my older favourite flowers and stencils and all sorts. So I'm now going to go with a very soft bit of Lumberjack Plaid. Look what a beautiful pink that is. It's the perfect rose pink. Just spreading that out. Sorry, slightly off camera. It's because I've got more and more paint on the mat. I have to get out of its way. So I'm just keeping this one very loose and soft. And you can see I've left lots of white space. I'm just letting those brush strokes be very loose and almost impressionistic. And what this is also doing is you're practicing brush strokes for if you ever wanted to, I don't know, paint your own roses. So these stamps can be a stepping stone to other things. So again, staying very loose. I'm not going to keep this one tidy. And this I would call more of a painting process than a colouring in process. The other has been colouring in with watercolour mediums, but this is really allowing me to just be loose and soft and sketchy and watercoloury, and really take advantage of what watercolours are capable of, which is this lovely journey across the paper. Soft, smooth, elegant, delicate, keeping things very light and very simple. So that's kind of all I'm gonna do for today. It feels like a lovely way to spend a little bit of time on a steamingly hot day enjoying roses that I can't sit out in the garden and enjoy at the moment because it's too warm. But there we are. That's my little offering for you today. If you've enjoyed that, do give me a thumbs up. I will of course dive in for a close-up any second now. And even though these are just practice sheets, of course, what we could then do, hang on, is cut them out and add them maybe to a cardboard panel, an embossed wooden panel, an actual piece of wood, layer them up. These are mounted on padded foam tape. More details about these in the launch blog post. But those roses are ready to move on to other projects. You could use them as a centerpiece on a card, on a journal page, any kind of project you like. But really what this is about giving yourself a chance just to play and practice with different colours, with different mediums, and see which medium gives you the most joy. It will be different for each of us. Mixing and matching, adding pencil to paint, paint to pencil, water to paint, wet on dry, wet on wet. Have a play. Thanks so much for your company as always. Do leave comments and questions down below. As always, I'll list as many of the ingredients as I can remember or think of. down below, so check it out there, and thank you so much as always for your company on this creative journey. Happy crafting all.